What exactly did Lewis Hamilton see in the Suzuka data that left Frédéric Vasseur completely shocked? And why could that discovery change Ferrari's course from this very Japanese Grand Prix? Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. The start of the weekend at Suzuka seemed to follow the usual script for Ferrari: discretion in timing, intense work on data collection, and a general feeling that true performance was hidden under testing programs. However, from the first moment, there were signs that did not fully fit with what the team expected to find on the track, and it was precisely there that a situation began to develop that no one inside the garage anticipated. Because while other teams were simply seeking to optimize their configurations, Ferrari was facing something deeper: understanding behavior that was not entirely consistent with its simulations. Lewis Hamilton took to the track with a very clear focus, continuing his adaptation process to the SF26, but also beginning to push the car's limits on a circuit as demanding as Suzuka, where every corner exposes any aerodynamic or mechanical weakness. And it was precisely in those fast corners, in those areas where the car must be absolutely precise, where strange sensations began to appear. It wasn't an obvious loss of performance nor a clear setup error. It was something more subtle, a disconnect between what the driver expected from the car and what he was actually receiving in response. Unlike other drivers, Hamilton doesn't need many laps to identify when something isn't working as it should. His experience allows him to detect small changes in the balance of the car, variations in aerodynamic load, or even inconsistencies in energy delivery. And at Suzuka, those little signs started to add up. The worrying thing was not that the car was slow, but that it was not predictable in certain phases of the lap, something that on a circuit like this can make the difference between competing for the podium or being trapped in the middle zone. Meanwhile, from the wall, Frédéric Vasseur observed a session that was apparently normal, with Ferrari inside the top 6 and without serious errors on the track. But when Hamilton's first radio reports began to arrive, and more importantly, when engineers began to cross-reference those comments with telemetric data, the situation began to change tone. Because what Hamilton was feeling was not only confirmed in the numbers, but also revealed an inconsistency that was not foreseen in the development of the car. This is key to understand. Ferrari was not simply testing new parts, it was validating an important technical package that should bring them closer to their rivals. And when an anomaly appears in the middle of that process, the entire plan falters. Because it's no longer about optimizing, it's about understanding if the base of the car is working as it should. Furthermore, this moment comes in a very particular context for Hamilton within the team. After a start where he had to quickly adapt to Ferrari's style and Leclerc's approach, the Briton had already begun to find a stronger connection with the car. He had adjusted his driving, better understood the car's limits, and was beginning to build confidence. But precisely for that reason, this type of unexpected behavior is even more alarming because it appears just when it seemed that everything was starting to fall into place. What makes this moment so critical is that we are not talking about an obvious problem that can be solved with a simple change of settings. We are talking about something that arises under controlled conditions, in a session designed to understand the car, and that is also detected by one of the most precise drivers in history. That makes the discovery much more serious than it might seem at first glance. And so, almost without making a sound, Ferrari went from a seemingly routine testing session to facing an internal mystery that would completely change the focus of the weekend. Because now the question was no longer how much they could improve, but what was really going wrong within SF26. The key moment came when Ferrari began to cross-reference 3 elements that rarely fail when analyzed together: pure telemetry, driver sensations, and correlation with the simulator. And it was there, right at that intersection of information, where the real problem appeared that left the entire team in silence, because what Hamilton was reporting did not coincide with what the car should be doing according to the theoretical data. Hamilton began to insist on a very specific pattern. The car reacted differently between seemingly similar corner entries. In some laps, the SF26 showed solid, stable, even competitive behavior in fast sectors, but in others, without obvious changes in tires or configuration, a sudden loss of confidence appeared in the front axle or a slight rear instability that completely broke the flow of the lap. This is not a minor problem. In Formula One, consistency is almost more important than pure pace, and when a driver cannot anticipate how the car will react, the limit is no longer accessible. The engineers, reviewing the data, hope to find a clear explanation. Temperatures, degradation, fuel load, wind, but nothing quite fit. And this is where the discovery begins to take shape. What they found was not a specific failure, but a variation in aerodynamic behavior that seemed to depend on extremely sensitive factors, possibly related to the interaction of the new parts that Ferrari had introduced for this Grand Prix. This type of problem is one of the most complex that a team can face, because it is not that a part does not work, but that the car falls into a performance window that is too narrow. That is, it works very well in specific conditions, but as soon as you go slightly out of that range, performance drops or becomes unpredictable. And on a circuit like Suzuka, where each corner requires absolute precision, that limitation is magnified. When this information reached Frédéric Vasseur, the reaction was immediate. It wasn't just worry, it was real shock. Because this means that the package of improvements that was supposed to bring Ferrari closer to the lead could be introducing additional complexity rather than a clear solution. And that completely changes the reading of the weekend. It is no longer about extracting more performance, but rather about understanding whether that performance is usable in real qualifying and race conditions. Furthermore, there's an even more delicate detail. These types of inconsistencies are not always detected in the wind tunnel or in the simulator. Many times they only appear on the track when the car is subjected to real forces, wind variations, temperature changes, and dynamic conditions that cannot be replicated 100%. And that would explain why this problem had not been identified before, until Hamilton pushed it to the limit at Suzuka. This connects directly with something that had already been hinted at the start of the season. Ferrari has potential, but does not yet have full control over that potential. In previous races, it had been seen that performance could fluctuate depending on the conditions, but now, with this discovery, it is clear that it is not just a matter of execution, but of understanding the car. And this is where it all becomes really critical. Because if Ferrari fails to stabilize that performance window, any improvement they introduce can become a double-edged sword. More speed, yes, but less predictability. And in Formula One, that usually translates into errors, inconsistencies in qualifying, and strategic difficulties in the race. Thus, what began as a simple practice session ended up revealing one of the most dangerous weaknesses that a car can have, not knowing exactly when it will perform at its maximum and when it will fail you. The real problem for Ferrari is not what happened in practice, it is what can happen from now on. Because with Hamilton's discovery already on the table, the entire weekend in Suzuka completely changes focus, and what seemed like an opportunity to get closer to the lead can become an extreme situation where every decision will be critical. From this point on, Ferrari faces an extremely delicate dilemma. On the one hand, they have a car that has shown to have real potential, capable of placing itself in competitive positions even without making the most of it. But on the other hand, they now know that this performance is conditioned to a very specific window that, if not perfectly controlled, can disappear at any moment. This directly impacts the classification, which is where everything is put to the limit. Because in a fast lap, there is no room for doubt. The driver needs total confidence to attack each corner, especially on a circuit like Suzuka, where fast links require absolute precision. And this is where Hamilton's discovery becomes critical. If the car does not always respond the same, the driver cannot push it to the limit without taking an enormous risk. Hamilton understood it instantly. This isn't a problem of going faster, it's a problem of knowing when you can go fast. And that difference in Formula One changes everything. Because while other teams may focus on extracting tenths, Ferrari could be forced to compromise performance to ensure stability. That means more conservative classifications, less competitive starting positions, and consequently, much more complicated races from the start. But the impact doesn't stop there. In the race, this inconsistency can be even more dangerous. With constant changes in fuel, tire degradation, and track conditions, a car with a narrow performance window can become unpredictable over different stints. What works one moment may fail to work the next, forcing the team to constantly react instead of executing a solid strategy. And this ties in with something that Ferrari has been trying to correct since previous seasons: operational consistency. It is no longer enough to have speed. They need to control it, understand it, and replicate it in any conditions. Because if they don't achieve it, they will always be depending on specific circumstances to perform, and that, in a long season, is unsustainable. Vasseur's reaction to this scenario makes it clear. This is not a simple setup adjustment. It is a structural issue that can define the immediate direction of the team. Because if they decide to move forward with this technical package, they will have to quickly find a way to extend that performance window. But if they don't succeed, they could be forced to take a step back, rethink configurations, or even limit the use of certain improvements. And this is where the true dimension of the problem appears: time. In Formula One, there is no room to stop. The calendar advances, the rivals evolve, and every weekend counts. What is a warning today could become a clear disadvantage in the championship tomorrow if it is not resolved quickly. So what Hamilton discovered in a simple practice session not only shocked Vasseur, it completely changed Ferrari's narrative in Japan. They are no longer simply looking for performance. Now they are struggling to understand their own car before that lack of understanding costs them key points. And the big question that remains in the air is as simple as it is disturbing. Will they be able to correct it in time? Or are we seeing the beginning of a much bigger problem for Ferrari in 2026? Ferrari arrived at Suzuka with the intention of hitting the table, but what they ended up finding was a much more complex reality than they expected. Because beyond positions, times, or superficial sensations, the true impact of this weekend comes from something much deeper, the understanding of your own car. And in that regard, what Lewis Hamilton discovered has raised a red flag that can no longer be ignored. What seemed like a simple technical adjustment has become a structural issue. A car that has speed, yes, but that still does not offer the confidence or consistency necessary to compete at the highest level in any conditions. And in today's Formula One, where the differences are minimal, that lack of predictability can make the difference between fighting for victory or being left out of the fight even before Sunday. Frédéric Vasseur's reaction was no coincidence. It was the response of someone who understands that these types of problems not only affect one weekend, but can condition the entire development of a season. Because when you don't completely control your car, every improvement becomes an unknown, every decision a risk, and every race a gamble. And this is where Ferrari has more than just a result at stake in Japan. What is at stake is your ability to react, to adapt, and above all, to understand if you are building a champion car or one that can only perform in perfect conditions. Because the difference between the two is what defines the teams that fight for titles and those that stay halfway. Hamilton, with his experience, has put the problem on the table before it is too late. It has made visible something that could have gone unnoticed until it became a major crisis. And now, all the pressure falls on Ferrari, on its technical capacity, on its strategic decisions, and on its speed of reaction. Because Suzuka has not only been a practice session, it has been a turning point. And the big question that remains is inevitable. Will this be the moment in which Ferrari corrects course, or the beginning of a problem that will mark its entire season? Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.